Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Emily Clear, and I'm the Director of Adult Psychotherapy Services here at the Family Institute of Northwestern. I am super excited to be joined today by a few of our staff clinicians, but before I introduce them, I'd like to tell you a little bit about us as an organization. We are a unique relational mental health organization. We are affiliated with Northwestern University, as I mentioned, with two master's degrees, one in marriage and family therapy and one in counseling. In addition to that, we are one of the preeminent researchers of relational mental health, and we have a needs-based clinic, the Betty D. Harris Clinic, for qualifying clients that is staffed by our student therapists and training. And in addition to that, we have a robust staff clinical practice, and I'm excited to be joined today by three members of that team. Let me introduce everyone. First, we have Dr. Chika Ofodu. Did I say it right, Chika? She is a member of our child, adolescent, and family team. I'm also excited to be joined by Emma Meyerhoff, who's a member of our mindfulness behaviors therapy team. And finally, I'm also joined by Ethan Husbands, who's a member of our cognitive behavioral therapy team. So, welcome everyone. We are going to spend today talking a little bit about uncertainty in our current socioeconomic and political times, and a little bit about how we can help support each other and what we're doing to help support clients through these times. So, I want to get the conversation started with the world feeling so incredibly heavy and uncertain right now. We're exposed to constant news cycles, and we're finding ourselves in this kind of never-ending scrolling social media cycles. A lot of my clients, and I'm sure a lot of yours as well, are reporting feeling like it's really difficult to kind of manage their boundaries, manage stress levels and emotions. As therapists, we can see how stress and fear can impact somebody's emotional health. What are some of the signs that stress or fear are impacting people, especially related to things that are beyond their control? Um, Emma, like, what are you seeing? Like, what are the signs of that kind of impact?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say one of the signs that we might see when stress or fear of uncertainty in our world is maybe taking a toll on someone's well-being. We might see when people start trying to kind of over control the things that they can. So when the world feels unpredictable, of course, we look for certainty somewhere. And that might show up like in relationships, for example, trying to manage other people's emotions or seeking reassurance. That tendency to over control can also show up in like habits. So that could be eating, that could be staying up late scrolling on your phone because it feels like you're finally in charge of your own time after a long day. And so, of course, these behaviors are coming from a place of wanting stability, wanting certainty, but be mindful of if over time they're actually adding to maybe your sense of exhaustion or sense of disconnection.
Mhm. Yeah, great point. I'll kind of throw this out to the entire group. Do you guys see any differences depending on the age of your clients or developmental stage of your clients related to this?
I would say that I tend to see, yeah, some differences depending on the age. I think for younger folks that might look like isolating a bit or kind of going inward a little bit more. So maybe they're spending more time on their phones or just in their rooms, right? Paying attention to that, or they may have a bit more of an attitude. Um, I think for older folks, that might look like kind of similar, but maybe some additional irritability or, maybe signs of depression or anxiety, as we're talking about some maybe more obvious signs. Um, I also want to note that I think some of these signs may show up depending on cultural differences, right? And so irritability again. Black and brown folks may show up with a bit more of that. They may show up with a bit more of a heightened nervous system as they've been dealing with the fear and stress as it relates to a lot of this uncertainty, in addition to other forms of trauma or uncertainty that they have had to navigate given their identities.
That's a really important call out, Chica. I really appreciate you naming that in this space. And I can imagine that shows up differently depending on what the uncertain situation is as well, right? There's a lot happening in our communities right now in the Chicagoland area that I feel like would impact that as well. Yeah. Ethan, anything you would like to add, either about like ages or stages or just in general about that feeling of out of control?
Yeah, I think kind of following up on what Chica mentioned, the kind of feelings can be, I think, similar for a lot of folks, but the kind of context and what's behind that can be different. For younger folks, I think a lot of what I'm seeing is like what's going to happen to my job, what's going to happen to my industry. This I'm so uncertain about the future. And I think for some of the older generations, it's can be kind of shock and awe of like this is kind of not what I expected things to look like. And I'm worried about my children. I'm worried about future generations. So a lot of those same feelings of uncertainty and worry, but kind of where our attention goes can fluctuate between different generations and individuals.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And naming that piece around that like job insecurity makes me think about how much financial insecurity there is right now, whether it is employment or loss of job or coming out of the government shutdown.
Mhm.
Um, Many families are struggling with rising costs and navigating sort of these various factors that are playing into that. What are we seeing, or what are you each seeing within your practices that are related to financial insecurity? Ethan, you mentioned a great one around like, will I be able to have a job? Chico, what's kind of coming up for you in your practice around that, especially navigating with families and young children?
Yeah, yeah. This question makes me think of recently I got this book called There's No Place for Us, Working and Homeless in America by Brian Goldstone. And essentially, the book speaks on this idea of like the working homeless, which are essentially folks who are employed but still facing, housing instability, especially due to the increase in, like we were mentioning, living costs
Mhm.
and low wages. And so, across the board, I'm seeing folks navigating, as we were mentioning, job insecurity, housing instability. They're facing a lot of anxiety and uncertainty around being able to meet basic needs that they used to be able to meet. I'm seeing folks working more, but still not struggling to make ends meet. And so there's a lot of grief and dissatisfaction and frustration and resentment around what's happening for them, what's happening on a sort of broader level, um, and even more conflict, right? Because folks are also coming into these relationships that they have, whether it's with their families or with their partners, with sort of that heightened vulnerability. So we're seeing a lot more conflict showing up, and people are exhausted from having to put out all these various fires that they're navigating.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent call out, Chica, about the increase of conflict. And I think, there's a lot of data showing that when we are in financially, economically constrained times, that we do see a rise in intimate partner violence and violence within households.
Yes.
What are some of the resources or ways we could provide some help to people if they find themselves in situations with increasing conflicts in their personal life or at work too? I do imagine it bleeds into those spaces as well.
Yeah, I mean, none of us carries our problems alone. Like, we all exist within systems. And so, especially when our like outside systems, like the big picture systems that we exist in, especially when those systems are threatening or potentially causing financial anxiety, I think one of the resources that we have is leaning into our sort of smaller level systems, whether that's a marriage, a family, a community, a workplace. And so I think of course, conflict is really normal and understandable coming up in these moments. So I think maybe getting clear on maybe your personal financial goals so that you can share that as effectively as possible with the people around you, and really working on like getting on the same team against the problem as opposed to having further division within your smaller systems.
Mm.
Yeah. And I would probably want to piggyback off of what Emma is sharing and really getting curious about what that conflict, especially if it's related to financial stress, what that's even about. Is it about now that folks are having to work more, are you spending less time with each other? Um, are you having to adjust the roles that you used to play within your family or within your relationship, right? So, did you go from feeling financially independent to now you're wondering if your savings will sustain you as you find a job because you got laid off? Are you going from being a stay-at-home parent to now you have to enter the workforce to make ends meet? So really getting curious about what it's about so that we can sort of take the conversation away from being solely about financial stress and money to what's going on relationally, what's going on within one's own needs and desires in their own life, and kind of have a bit more of a meaningful conversation, um, so that in the midst of all of this, couples or families, they can get more understanding, more intimacy with each other as they're navigating this.
Yeah, I think that's a really important call out, especially since it may not just be within like a couple system, right? With their own children, this could be an intergenerational
Yeah.
dynamic as well. If you're having to suddenly turn to, your parents or aunts and uncles or grandparents for some financial support in a way that doesn't feel terribly wonderful for you or is unexpected as well. Yeah, I think that's a great point. So many people are feeling anxious right now for a variety of reasons. What are you guys recommending as ways that clients can cope with this or manage with the increased stress, especially as we're naming, right? Like it could be not contained to just financial stress, right? Like there could be many facets going on. How are you guys supporting your clients, or what would you recommend for people to help manage the stress and anxiety around uncertainty? Ethan, I'll turn it over to you first, maybe.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things I'm hearing from folks is like this feels all consuming. It's part of, when I wake up, I'm checking the news and I'm feeling nervous, I'm feeling uncertain. And really, what I have been seeing a lot of is people in kind of like a survival mode of I'm always looking for the next shoe to drop. I'm always kind of bracing for impact. And one of the tools that I like to give to clients is trying to implement some worry delay or postponement or set some boundaries around how frequently we're engaging with things like the news or financial insecurity. So setting aside 20 to 30 minutes every day to talk about these issues, spend time just kind of thinking about them or worrying about them and processing them, I think can give people a little bit of a sense of control back and feel like this isn't impacting me all throughout the day, but it instead is something um, that I do have a little bit of control over, and I can leave some of my worries to that specific time, and I can try and get back to work or helping out my kids.
It's a great suggestion.
Um, Something too that I'm thinking about is how to invite in more play and joy and like ease.
Mm.
So I've noticed that coming up in my work with couples or even families is, you know, we need a date night.
Hmm.
We need family night, and it doesn't have to be expensive either. Google can be your best friend in terms of searching, free family night ideas or family night, couples night at home ideas, right? Ways to, again, just have fun. Um, because I think, again, life is feeling very serious for a lot of people. And if we can experience joy, some ease in the midst of that, that can help to also sort of reinforce some sense of I have control over this versus life is controlling me or my relationship.
Yeah, I feel like that's such an important point and something that often gets lost, especially with couples. I think
Yeah.
it's easier to ground in like, how do we have joy with our kids, but to also have joy in other spaces is so important. And I'm thinking about all the Northern Lights this week, right? And just like taking a moment earlier this week with my son to stand outside for 20 minutes instead of just like rushing into bedtime. It's like, no, we're going to just be present with this beautiful thing happening
Yeah.
outside of us too. Emma, anything that you're thinking of that's been really helpful with your clients?
Yeah, I like what both my colleagues have said so far. I would say biggest things are like self-care and relational care. So like making sure that you're doing the kind of base level of what you need to do to stay in that place. So that's kind of the, like sleeping, eating, getting some movement. That stuff really does make a huge difference in emotional resilience. So when you have that stuff taken care of, you are more able to handle the challenges that life continues to throw at us.
Mhm.
So focusing on that self-care piece plus the relational care, as Chica said, like making time for fun and connection and joy, I think is really important in relationships.
Yeah. Are there any differences when we're talking about maybe, I'm thinking about some of our older adult clients who are maybe really anxious about retirement and feeling scared or isolated and alone. Um, are there specific things we've talked a little bit about, like younger families and young adults? Like, are there anything that we would recommend to those older clients who are feeling maybe I think Ethan said it early on, right? Like feeling a little hopeless about like the world they're leaving behind. Are there anything specific for that age group that we would want to recommend?
Probably community building would be the biggest of like finding a class, finding a volunteer opportunity, finding a neighbor that you could spend a little time with and being able to build those connections, especially intergenerational connections, I think can be really protective.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Thinking about children and teens, they have a lot of access to information, probably more than all previous generations combined, as well as like social media, friends at school, their neighbors. How can parents and caregivers talk to their kids, especially if their kids are expressing some worry about violence or unrest or safety in an age-appropriate way? Particularly, I'm thinking about like when this is coming up about kids expressing feeling safe at school or going to school or getting to school.
Mhm.
Chica, what are some of the ways that parents and caregivers can help children navigate that stress and anxiety, both maybe as the parent or caregiver as well as the child?
Yeah. I would say definitely leaning on those resources that are readily available to you. The Family Institute is a prime example of, our website features a lot of videos, articles, where folks are talking about these very issues and how to engage in conversations with children. I would also say YouTube, you know, TikTok, Instagram, even podcasts, like using these various forms of media and social media to um, figure out how other parents and caregivers are engaging in these conversations because I think it also helps to um, for folks to really see that they're not alone in trying to figure out how to do this, and folks are trying to do this. They're in the process of working through it. And then lastly, I probably think about how can parents, you know, get curious with their kids' teachers, to understand are these conversations happening in the classroom or at school, and sort of spreading the conversation so that it doesn't feel like the burden or the responsibility is solely on them as the parents, but how can we invite in more people to engage our child into these conversations? Because, to raise a child, it takes a village. And so really spreading that level of exposure.
Yeah, kind of.
Absolutely.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I would just add in that like unfortunately, as you said, Emily, there are a myriad of reasons that kids might be experiencing stress or fear for themselves or for their peers, related to going to school in Chicago and across the country. And of course, the answer to this depends on what the fear is and how to engage with the client about it or with the kiddo about it. But I would say probably always start by like validating the fear, right? Letting the kids know that it makes sense to feel scared sometimes, and especially so when there are real threats. Because I think the goal is not to erase the fear or stress, but to help kids feel supported and capable in the face of it.
Mm.
As Chica said, helping them lean on their trusted adults like parents, teachers, counselors, family members, so that the kids don't feel like they have to carry that fear alone.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, or isolation. That's a great point.
Yeah, I totally second like coming from a place of openness and curiosity um, with what kids are bringing into the home, what they're seeing on social media, what they're talking to with their friends about. Um, and really trying to validate those emotions. And also, I think sometimes taking a kind of show, don't tell approach, looking
Hmm.
at things together or talking about recent news together and trying to pull out kids' reactions to what they're seeing and use that as a jumping off point for discussion instead of maybe lecturing or trying to tell kids what's necessarily right or wrong.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like that idea of leveraging what they're already kind of consuming or interacting with, but doing it in a shared way or a shared space so that you open up that space for dialogue.
Mm.
What about when parents are expressing safety for their own children or children in their community going to school? How are you helping? Does it look different when it's a parent fear about children going to school than the child expressing fear?
I think it's in some ways similar in the idea of we can't erase the fear, but to be able to move in values aligned ways even while experiencing the fear. So
Mhm.
in that sense, it's similar. Of course, it's different in terms of the like responsibility that's taken on about how to manage the fear and what's the next step. But I think absolutely the goal is we can't get rid of it, so let's find ways to kind of be resilient through it.
Mhm. Yeah. Are there other things we haven't talked about that could help kids feel empowered or hopeful in their uncertainty? And this could be larger than just safety at school, right? If they're expressing, I know a lot of young adults and teens are expressing worries and concern about the climate and the condition of the world, right? From an environmental or AI and jobs. What are some small ways that families or parents can help empower kids to have some hope?
One thing that I was, I think, really inspired by was um, how a client was talking to and preparing their children for what they might see out in the public and community right now. And I remember specifically saying, like, if you see something that makes you feel unsafe, um, find an adult. Look for whether that's a teacher, whether that's a coach. I think that can be really powerful of just reminding kids that they aren't alone, that community is out there, even if parents can't be readily there to help them, that there is support around them.
Mhm. That's a great point, Ethan.
I think also nurturing kids' passions. Like if there's something that they seem to be interested in or curious about or want to learn more about, whether that's related to some of these kind of bigger picture concerns or not, uh, really letting them run with that. Because I think expansiveness and curiosity really goes a long way and goes along with the idea of hope. And so helping kids see that like, yeah, things can be expansive, things can be big, we can learn new things. That I think can be really protective.
Mhm. Absolutely. I also think about helping them engage with their community, whether it's the community at their own school, the community that surrounds the school, the community of interest, right? Like really helping them feel connected and connected to maybe some of the solutions. I think if they're expressing some worry about peers not having enough for Christmas or the holidays coming up, what are the ways that we as a family could help our community at a local level? I think is often a really great way to help kids also feel empowered and that what they do makes a difference in their community too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. As the holidays approach, I know all of us probably sit with this all the time, right? It's a really mixed constellation of emotions that come up for people during the holidays. And I think given how much uncertainty there is, given how much social and economic and political unrest there is happening, this can create a lot of family tension,
Mm.
especially when family members have different political beliefs or social beliefs or even economic situations. What are some of the ways that we would recommend people trying to stay grounded and calm during family gatherings that might feel emotionally charged?
Yeah, I'm thinking about boundaries. Um, I think this word gets used quite often, but I think boundaries are really critical. I would invite folks to either learn or relearn and unlearn some things that they've understood or known about boundaries, especially again in communities of color where boundaries are not really a thing
Mm,
or boundaries are disrespectful. They're
mhm,
not really taken or received well by family. So really having to unpack that for yourself and also allow yourself to set those boundaries, and getting clear about in when the holidays come up or when these gatherings come up, what kind of environment do you not want to have? So
mm,
getting really clear about that and then also allowing yourself to imagine the type of environment that you do want to have. So what kinds of conversations are you not okay with having, whether it's about school? Don't ask me about school. Don't ask me about who I'm
mm,
dating. Don't ask me about parts of my identity that have maybe, you know, come with judgment or shame by folks. Are there certain family members you don't want to be around? And how can you again support yourself through that? Um, because I think that opens the door to us exploring like what are your coping strategies, and then also what are your exit strategies. Um,
mm,
Something I really try to explain to clients is you're not stuck in any situation. There's an exit for you. There's a door. And so really what would that look like? Do you need to spend a little less time at home? Do you
mhm.
want to bring a friend or a partner with you to these gatherings as a way to support yourself? Um, so just getting really clear on that type of environment and then applying your boundaries accordingly.
I love that. And I love the nuance that you put into boundaries because I do think it is kind of one of those buzzy words that gets thrown around.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example, Chica, of like an exit strategy that you've worked on with a client? Because I think that's a great idea, but I think sometimes people are like, what does that mean? Like, can you give an example of that?
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes apply it alongside mindfulness. So,
Mhm.
really, allowing yourself to identify where the door is so
Mm,
that you physically can see that there's a place where you enter and then a place where you exit. So, I think at times folks can feel, again, stuck or overwhelmed. And so knowing that you can actually like get out of that space physically and literally. So even just allowing yourself to spend some time like looking at the corners of the room or looking, behind you, engaging your vagal nerve. And then um, I think an exit strategy too is again, if you are visiting family and, rather than staying 3 or 4 days, you find a way to stay 1 or 2 days.
mm.
And hey, I've got a meeting. I've got to head back home or I've got work. So I do have to head just so that you have an end point. You know when it's going to end for yourself and you have some semblance of control around that.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm glad that this is part of the conversation because this is one of, I feel like the biggest themes that I'm seeing is clients struggling with the like societal division. And so I think in going into holiday gatherings, I would say it really helps to start by asking yourself, like, what is my primary goal for this gathering? Is my intention to have a warm and peaceful gathering with minimal conflict? Okay, cool. Is my intention to defend my beliefs and offer a new perspective for family? Okay, cool. Is my goal something else? Okay, great. And only you can know what your goal is for a particular, gathering. But then it's about choosing actions that align with that goal. And when you know your goal, it's much easier, I think, to stay grounded and respond intentionally instead of getting swept up in the emotions of the moment. Because emotions are going to come, but if we can stick to our goal, and then you can also see if your goal is incompatible with the goals of some other people there, that's when absolutely like the boundaries piece might need to come in.
That's great. Yeah, I'm imagining those two things going together, right? Like that preparing to go in with your goal, but also when you get there, and even as you're preparing to go in, those exit strategies, right? If this isn't aligning with my goal, how am I going to exit this situation? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I totally second that, Emma. I think often what I see people bringing into session is like, I really just want to avoid getting into this political debate. I really want to avoid what happened last year. And I think thinking about what it is that we want to approach, as well as what we want to avoid, can really give people, like Emma said, that goal.
Mhm. So it's also making me think of, I talk about with a lot of my clients about you don't have to go home to your family if your goal doesn't align with that, right? And so talk a little bit about, I try to make space for family of choice too, whether that's time with friends or because you have established a family of choice over time. Why is that really important during the holidays or any time of the year, actually?
Yeah, I think the holidays can be a particularly isolating time if folks aren't able to make it to see family. There are things showing up in their family. So, one of the things I like to think of is the concept of connection more broadly than just family. So, whether that looks like neighbors, coworkers, friends, I think all can be antidotes to feeling lonely. And I also think the holidays, the colder months, are times to reflect, and sometimes trying to think about and find ways to satisfy some of your own needs, as well as, again, tapping into your community, I think can be great ways to manage through this time.
Yeah, that's great, Ethan.
Yeah, and I'd probably just add that, family of choice, it represents self-expression. It represents agency over your environment and the people you choose to have into your life. Um, and so staying connected to those pieces, especially around holidays where maybe historically you've had to stifle parts of yourself or suppress parts of yourself for to get through or to cope through these gatherings. Um, that kind of doing something else helps to really sort of um, just reframe and reinforce for yourself that you do actually have more control than you may realize at the time.
Yeah, that's really important. Let's talk a little bit about if Ethan kind of mentioned this a little bit when people are feeling lonely or alone at the holidays. And again, I know within economic situations being a little worse off, suicides go up, depression can go up. They go up with the holidays to begin with, and divorce rates go up post holidays. What are some of the things you recommend for people who are headed into the holidays feeling really alone and lonely and maybe really worried about the uncertainty outside feeling overwhelming?
Yeah, the holidays can be really tough when you're alone or disconnected from family. And so I think one thing I might encourage is for people to create their own rituals,
Mm.
because rituals are something that gives this season structure and meaning. And so that could be things like cooking yourself a special meal or taking a walk in a meaningful place or spending a day doing something that feels grounding or joyful to you. Because yeah, rituals do remind us that like connection and comfort can come not only from like family time, but also from the ways that we choose to care for ourselves.
I love that, Emma. That feels very parallel to what Chica said about family of choice too, right? Like very intentional in both those different ways. Let's talk a little bit about hope. As the world's feeling so heavy, how can people find a sense of hope or cultivate a sense of hope? Ethan, what have you done with clients to help them foster a sense of hope?
Yeah, I think two things come to mind. One of them is I'm reminded of Mr. Rogers coming out of retirement um, to respond to 9/11 and how do we talk to kids. And one of the things he suggested is like look for the helpers. And I think that can be a way to both give us direction, but also foster hope. Um, and then also, I think recently read a book on climate anxiety, and one of the takeaways from it was that um, actually finding connection and community can be one of the best antidotes to anxiety, is feeling like I'm not alone in this, and I am part of a larger thing than just myself experiencing these difficult times. So those are two things that I think come to mind for me.
Yeah, I definitely think community can be helpful. And I often think too, like green spaces too, like getting outside and connecting with the actual world, right? Like the earth can be really helpful too. Chica or Emma, anything that you suggest to clients to help them cultivate a sense of hope or purpose, I guess, would be another good word to anchor people in.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't say enough how important community is. Like that's been a through line, I think, throughout almost every question,
Yeah.
just because of how meaningful connection really is. And so I would say also with a sense of purpose, I think Emily, you said earlier, like communities of interest. I think that's a really big thing. If you can find something that feels like a little purposeful or feels like an interest of yours, and having a community around that, yeah, I think that would do wonders for hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd probably too, this came up earlier around service,
Mhm.
engaging in service, doing some community work, partnering with local agencies who are doing the work that you're interested in, or grassroots organizations. I think that is a way to remind yourself that there is ways you can affect change. Um, even if it's small, even if it's global, that, small things do make a big difference.
Yeah, I definitely. And I'm thinking too, that point you made earlier, Chica, about play. I think that's one of the greatest ways to cultivate joy. Even if it's a small amount of play and levity in a day, it can be very meaningful too.
Yeah, yeah. And
Right. And
oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to add that something I've also noticed is, um, folks are starting to maybe consider going back to school. Um,
Mm,
that has also been a big piece, and I think it has a lot to do with wanting to um, learn more about these issues that are happening, develop one's consciousness around, social issues, or and figure out ways to, again, make more of a difference or be more influential in their work environments or and so forth. So I would even consider that. Like, do you want to go back to school if that's a possibility?
yeah, that's a great point. And cultivating that sense of resilience too, right? Like hope and resilience are kind of two sides of the same coin a lot of time.
I was just going to add in the concept of balance too, because we're talking about some different things. Like on one end, we're talking about like service and getting involved in your community, and sometimes that looks like putting yourself in front of some of the pain that exists around us. Compared to the other side, is like making sure we've got time for play and levity and expansion, and all of these are amazing. Just being mindful about like, am I turned too far in one direction such that
Mm.
I'm not getting the other one and therefore not getting the kind of like full benefits of, I think, what these things can do for our hope.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a great point, Emma. That and I think a lot about rest, right?
Hmm.
Like, are we making enough time to rest?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I got this from a colleague here, Ben Rosen, who mentioned that um, the feelings that come up when we're seeing unrest and uncertainty in media, um, trying to think about what values those are indicating about what's inside you, about
Mm.
justice or compassion, um, and then seeing if you can find ways to move towards those values, even in small ways, um, I think can again foster that sense of hope and um, help us find meaning and purpose during these difficult times.
Yeah, that's a great point. Before we turn to some of the questions that are coming in, what are each of you doing for yourself to kind of help create joy? You know, we do a lot of heavy lifting as clinicians. What have you found for yourself that helps you create some cultivate some joy and hope?
One thing for me is that I've formed a little friend group with my neighbors, and I
Hmm.
feel like that is really helping me cultivate some joy and hope. It feels really nice to be connected to my neighborhood, to my, sort of smaller system around me. So I don't know, that's been something that's been really nice to like add in a little more connection to my day, even if it's just for like a quick hi on the back steps for 5 minutes. So yeah, that would be what I've been doing.
Yeah, I think about what has been good for my nervous system. And so, reading, writing, I've been diving m more into, um, you know, allowing myself to really distance from people who my nervous system has not felt that great around and moving towards where I have felt safe or centered.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, even recently I went to this like hip hop fitness class and it was I mean amazing in terms of being around particularly like other Black women, all ages, all body types, and being able to just like move my body in a space that felt really safe, and grounding. So really just connecting to what is going to be bring me back to sort of this like homeostasis, so to speak. Yeah.
I love the idea of like organizing around your nervous system.
Yeah.
What about for you, Ethan?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has come up for me is thinking about health. And I think in order to show up for clients or to show up for our family members, um, a thing we can do for ourselves is to try and look after our health. And so whether that's exercise, whether that's like you mentioned, Emily, rest, um,
Mhm.
I think can maybe sometimes feel a little selfish or it's like hard to have time for this stuff. Um, but I think it also can foster a sense of confidence in ourselves. I think that allows us to show up in the ways that we want to.
Hmm.
That's great. Thank you all for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, our first question is, how do you manage the thin line of opening up a space for a dialogue with kids and reopening the fear? And it has another part that's like, how resilient are our kids in a time of turmoil? I personally think kids are very resilient, so I'll state that.
I would go back to what Ethan was saying earlier about leading with curiosity. I think opening up a dialogue where you're sort of telling kids some stuff of what's going on and really trying to pry their thoughts out of them, uh, that might be a little less effective than kind of maybe sharing your own thoughts. And if the kid wants to respond, they can. Or asking a question to the table, including other family members, and then if the kid, and then maybe asking the kid their thoughts versus like a sort of interrogation about how they're perceiving everything. I think that would be one thing that I might keep in mind.
Yeah. And I think to what you were naming, Emily, around kids being resilient, they are. And so moving accordingly, that the goal isn't to avoid the fear. The fear is going to come. I mean, it's a very scary time right now. So the fear is extremely valid, but trusting that my kid is resilient and I can help them navigate this fear in the way that I'm trying to help myself navigate this fear, but I'm not trying to fix it. I think that can be sort of a maybe a tendency or a desire is, I want to fix how my kid is feeling. I really want to, and rightfully so, as a parent, but really allowing yourself to get out of that fix-it mode and instead, how can I just open space for the fear to exist and trust that they're going to come to me if it feels overwhelming and that I can support them through it.
And I like that idea that like it isn't always going to be solved or fixed. I think that's a good message for kids to internalize and to take in, right? Because that's the majority of life, right? Like there are going to be a lot of things that aren't solvable or fixable, and learning how to tolerate that is so critically important.
Yeah.
So we have another comment slash question, and it says, I'm trying to navigate disagreements with friends about current events and their impact. What are some of the ways to stay connected with them and respect their ideas while also validating my own experiences and beliefs?
Yeah, I might kind of go back to some of my thoughts earlier on, these family moments of like pick a moment. If this is a conversation that you feel like is authentic and values aligned to have with your friend about this disagreement and about the kind of challenges that you're having with it, great. Pick a time to do that. And in your mind, remind yourself that that's going to be the time. That
Mhm.
way, when you are spending other time with that friend, you're able to be more sort of authentically present and enjoy the time that you have in those other moments versus sort of always having in the back of your mind, ugh, but there's this thing. So kind of like what Ethan was saying earlier, if like pick a worry time, it's sort of like pick a time or sort of, yeah, have a space where that's going to happen so that you can be present in the other spaces.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think the answer is baked into the question. I think of this quote. I wish I remember who it was by, but they mentioned the antidote to propaganda is not fact checking, but it's actually connection. And so I
Mhm.
think thinking about and trying to foster that connection, I think being on either end of the aisle can be so divisive, but thinking about what it is that does originally connect you to that friend or family member, um, is probably the best thing you can do to um, have an open dialogue and potentially change their mind or come to more of an agreement. Um, so trying your best to maintain that connection, I think is probably one of the best things you can do.
Yeah, that's fair. I think often as a couples therapist, right, I coach my partners all the time that acknowledgement isn't the same as agreement.
Mhm.
Mm,
Acknowledge somebody else's belief system without saying that you agree or that you are even understanding, right?
Yeah.
I think about that a lot in these times. Chica, anything you would add?
Yeah, what Ethan has shared reminds me of, and I believe Maya Angelou had named this around, we are more similar than we are different.
mm,
So really reminding yourself what does bring this relationship together, right?
Mhm.
And reminding yourself that you are more similar to each other than you are different. Um, so that at least serves as a foundation that even in the midst of our differences, there's love there, there's mutual respect. Granted, obviously, if those things aren't there, then you may have to reevaluate that relationship, but really centering around how similar you are to each other and how you're able to maybe navigate this line of difference.
Yeah, I love that. And I also like that you're highlighting that sometimes the reflection is, does this relationship still work for me and serve me? Am I getting what I need out of it too? And giving yourself permission to explore what it would be like to no longer be as invested in it or invested in a different way too, I think is a really critically important piece of navigating those differences.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this leads to our next question to some degree. What are the ways that people can support a family member that has chosen to separate for the holidays?
I mean, for one is to, and this may sound, but to almost congratulate that person for making the decision to separate, to set that boundary, to make what often for many people is a very hard decision to make. And then doing frequent check-ins, right? Especially if you've decided to still attend whatever family gathering or so or the holidays, checking in with that family member throughout. How are they doing? How
Mhm.
was it for them afterwards? How are they feeling prior to? Just so that you're offering still that safe space, even if you yourself haven't decided to separate, but you can still show up for the person who has.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. One is back to the idea of rituals. Like, I wonder if there is also a sort of creative new ritual that can be created across, across the country or something. Like, if there's a FaceTime check-in or something that you could do together in that way, that's maybe yeah, just a newer way to share the holiday with that person, for a way that works for them. And I also think the other piece is like allowing some space for whatever like your own grief that is
Mhm.
coming up from that separation. Because I think that's where we really get to like full acceptance is going to come with some of that grief. And I think it would be sort of more of a challenge if you're maybe stuck in the non-acceptance, this shouldn't be this way, because then that's going to come out in the interactions with that person, which may just push them further away.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think too about the narratives we create when somebody has set a boundary of that nature, right? That we need to have curiosity with our own narrative that we're creating, that we're not putting more of a negative or harsh frame on it than the actual person that's made the decision.
Right.
Mm.
So I think we have time for maybe one more question. Are there grounding techniques that you would recommend to help with managing anxiety that comes up?
I think one of the things I've seen a lot is with people feeling so overwhelmed um, and anxious, um, trying to, I think like Chika and Emma mentioned earlier, like over control and always trying to find ways to distract or escape from that anxiety. And um, unfortunately, I think this can have kind of the opposite effect that we want. So actually sometimes turning towards that emotion, giving ourselves permission to feel that emotion. This is a really difficult and scary time. And um, I'm reminded of another therapist here. Lisa would always say, name it to tame it. So I think acknowledging in yourself, I am feeling anxious. This is really difficult for me, can have a surprising amount of power.
Hmm.
Yeah, and a sort of quick and easy strategy would be do some paced breathing. So
Mm,
paced breathing will have the effect of activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps your body calm down. So paced breathing main points are slowing down the breath. So getting it slow. So that might look like breathing in for like maybe four. And then the other important piece is making your exhales longer.
Mm,
Those are the ways to get it to activate that parasympathetic nervous system. So breathing in for maybe four through your nose, breathing out for maybe eight through your mouth. And if you could do that for a couple minutes, that may help with some of the anxiety that just came up.
Chi-
Yeah.
Anything specific for kids that parents could do to help kids with grounding?
Yeah, well, I was gonna add a couple of things. One is grounding does not just have to look like breathing exercises or meditation. I think you can even either go on the Family Institute's website or even just Google um, and get an idea of other grounding techniques. That could be smelling a
Mhm.
candle, going outside and taking a brief walk. That could look like putting lotion on your hands
Mhm.
or taking just like a longer shower. Or, like there's multiple ways you can actually ground yourself. Again, grounding is essentially about bringing yourself to the present moment. And so I think parents could help children do this by one, doing it themselves, and inviting their children into this, hey honey, let's just smell some candles. Let's go to Marshall's and just walk around and smell candles. That's my own favorite activity, by the way. Or let's go outside. And granted, it is getting colder here in Chicago, but let's put on our coats and go outside for a second, even if it's just to stand and just smell the aroma outside. Let's fold some blankets. Let's play a little game. I think there's multiple ways you can really engage in how do I bring myself to the present moment, and then of course bring my kid alongside it.
That's great. That's great. I love going outside too. I recommend like a quick walk outside, even in the cold, maybe especially in the cold, right? Because you have that
Right.
sensory of the cold air hitting on your face and everything too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful that the three of you were able to join today and join me in this conversation. I want to share that we have a lot more, as Chica's mentioned multiple times. We have some wonderful resources on our website at thefamilyinstitute.org. I also want to share that as of December 1st, many of our clinical staff therapists will also be able to accept United Health insurance in addition to Blue Cross Blue Shield. So I wanted to highlight that as well. But we are so grateful to the three of you and everybody that joined us today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day.
Likewise. Thank you,
Thank you.
Emily.
And thank you, Emily.